Hi, everyone, and welcome to our FoodBytes webinar series. My name is Jillian Rago, and I'm with the FoodBytes team. I will be your host today. Following our previous session on funding startups through the current market, today we are hosting our 8th webinar in our effort to support and connect our FoodBytes community. To date, we've had over 1,500 attendees across 45 different countries tune in, and we've featured speakers across 4 different time zones, a feat we are proud to deliver on as a global platform. Now I'd like to pass it off to my colleague Sonia Shaker, who has a note to share for those of you who are new to our network.
We want to extend a very warm welcome to the companies that are new to our network. Through FoodBytes, we aim to create opportunities for entrepreneurs within the food and ag community that we've brought together over the past several years. Our programs, including these webinars, show how our community can build each other up during challenging times. For background on our main programs, FoodBytes Pitch provides structured mentor sessions, investor meetings, and corporate introductions, culminating in a live pitch on the final day. And FoodBytes Pilot pairs a corporate and startup together over 6 to 9 months to collaborate on a specific goal or industry challenge. If you're an investor or corporate interested in partnership, please reach out to us at foodbytes@rabobank.com. Or if you're a startup interested in learning more about our pitch or pilot programs, please fill out the interest form on our website at foodbytesworld.com. Applications for FoodBytes Pitch are opening on July 5th, so be sure to mark your calendars.
Perfect. Thank you, Sonia. So today we're going to be hearing from 3 speakers I'm really excited to introduce. First and foremost, we have Marcus Kennedy. He is the Executive Chairman of TeleSense Australia, and he is also a FoodBytes Pilot Program Partner. Say that 5 times fast. We also have Lisa Curtis joining us. She is the founder and CEO of startup Kuli Kuli, and she is an alum of our FoodBytes program. And finally, we have our very own Nichole Riley. She is our Chief HR Officer and a member of the North America Executive Committee for Rabobank. Today's webinar topic of discussion is leading through change. The coronavirus pandemic has created a sudden and extraordinary challenge for F&A businesses, and strong leadership is really critical to cultivating resilience for the future. Our speakers today are going to be talking about insights along the lines of what good crisis management looks like from the top, looking at business strategy and tangible changes and decisions to make so that you can ensure long-term success as a startup, as well as some key strategies and learnings on managing a workforce through a pandemic and beyond.
Yes, thanks, Jillian. You know, in addition to the global pandemic that Jillian just cited, I think it would be remiss if we didn't highly point out the horrific deaths of both George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery, and the countless others who have suffered from the systemic racism. We feel the outrage, pain, and unrest here in the U.S. as well as internationally. At FoodBytes, we stand united against racism and for equality. Within our platform, I am making it my personal mission to invest in ways to increase diversity in the FoodBytes community. To start, we are opening dialogue with our investors, our startups, and corporate partners, source input on how we can drive real, meaningful change within our industry. Today's discussion, as Jillian pointed out, is all about leadership. And leaders are navigating their businesses and employees through some of the most complex and urgent challenges of our time. A pandemic, and again now, a critical moment in the fight against racial injustice. Leadership is more vital than ever. I think we can all agree. I look forward to the group of esteemed panelists we have with us today who are all on the front lines responding to all of these challenges. I look forward to hearing from each and every one. Without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to Marcus Kennedy of TeleSense Australia.
Thank you, Anne. Hello, everyone. I'm Marcus Kennedy. Much of the last 7 or 8 years I've spent in the executive team of Australia's largest food and agribusiness, GrainCorp, and my role as the Chief Development Officer in leading strategy, business development, and also including setting up and running a successful innovation program. And through that program, I participated in 3 or 4 FoodBytes pilots programs and met and sponsored and have been involved with many startups. I'm now working very much so in the startup in food and ag space, and both as a strategy advisor, but also as a coach, mentor, and as a personal investor. There were three things I wanted to share with you today as part of leading through this turbulent and changing times. One is looking at the crisis management strategies of organisations and leaders. The second is that change in strategies and approaches as leaders. And then thirdly, touching on the role of startups and what they can do to take advantage in the current opportunities. Firstly, in terms of the crisis management and some of the more innovative practices we've seen or necessitated, I think good boards have performed well. They've effectively, the cream has risen to the top, but it has reinforced traditional, leadership skills that we would think of in terms of the need to be calm and composed as leaders, to really focus on priorities. Remember what your core priorities are. Be considered and measured in all decision making, which of course is more vital during these times. However, it has exposed gaps and failings at all levels, and different organisations have gone to the wall, as we know, around the world. However, one of the good things is that I've seen here locally, and I know others have, is the increased partnerships and alliances, very quickly formed between competitors often and across sectors. One notable one here in Australia, a large airline put off 20,000 employees, but the CEOs negotiated almost over a handshake to redeploy those employees into the supply chain of some of the big retailers that were being overwhelmed by demand. It has shown the need to adapt very fast and the increased use of digital technology and channels, of course. But it has, at the same time, exposed the lack of investment in food and agri innovation. We've seen supply chains not just become inefficient, but actually collapse under the pressure of demand. And we've seen here in Australia, many of the Asian outsourcing arrangements fall apart. In fact, some of the telcos still don't have their call centres online many weeks, months later. So the importance of communication, as we've seen, I think leaders and in particular chairmen, CEOs, chairwomen become more authentic and truly authentic in their style, broadcasting communications to their staff and to their teams from their living rooms in casual wear like the rest of us. So it's been a real leveller, I think, in terms of genuineness, authenticity, and a show of vulnerability from leaders. But overall, I think simplicity's been a theme, reducing complexity, prioritising what matters. If I could just quickly address some of the changes in strategies or leadership behaviours that we think in food and agri-business in particular that we might see or we have seen already. One is, I think, boards and executive teams are dealing with this just like everyone else. They've gone through a series of learnings, remembering that this is uncharted territory, both a health and an economic crisis. So it has impacted all levels. And I think that's made us, in particular leaders, more human, more caring and more understanding of what many of their employees and their staff and their customers go through. So it has necessitated, I think, leaders to be more balanced in their approach, more humanistic, you might say. It's not all about financial metrics and profit and loss statements. It's actually brought into focus the need for a broader range of cultural metrics, whether that's government regulated or community insisted. So leaders have had a new role to play. They've had to take a role of learning. What can we learn? How do we sustain that learning beyond the COVID-19? How do we innovate to bring more resilience to our businesses, to help our people, to make a more resilient supply chain? And from a strategy perspective, they've had to really ask the question, how do we take advantage of the opportunities that come out of the crisis? Where do we invest? And how do we invest to come out strong? But I think overall boards, leaders, and the future changes and attitudes that we'll see beyond COVID, some of them will embrace working from home as a long-term strategy. Others will have a new appreciation for supply chain, particularly in terms of surety of supply. The importance of resilience in innovation will become critical competencies of an organisation. Organisational culture will not just become words. It will actually mean caring for each other as people, as human beings, in our personal situations, as we've had to understand and be more flexible and adaptable for everyone's personal situations, but caring for our customers as well. The well-being and health of people will become more centre in strategy. Thirdly, just wanted to touch on my role in working with startups and young entrepreneurs and emerging businesses to say what have been some of the focus of our discussions. One has been really to reflect, to use the time to reflect, to really examine what their purpose is, to really pivot, to use that overused word, or to adapt to really what the opportunities coming out of COVID are. And that takes time to not just reflect, but review the business plan, talk to your investors, talk to all your stakeholders, and prioritize what's really important. But most importantly, it's really a discussion around the great opportunity that this crisis has exposed in food and agri, the lack of innovation, lack of investment. A lot of large and medium businesses are now going to be looking for that special edge coming out of COVID. So the message to entrepreneurs and startups in my domain has been be ready, be focused and be ready to really take advantage of those startup situations, need for innovation, and be prepared to scale up and build resilience in your business, both as an individual, as a leader, but help build that in the companies around you, the suppliers, your customers, and importantly, society as a general rule. Key takeaways, really for all sizes of business, big, large, small, or startups. Investing innovation across food and agri, please. The importance of resilience in culture, and rethink your purpose so that you really are adapting to the change. New metrics will be required across all our businesses. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Marcus. And I think that's a great segue into our startup speaker, Lisa Curtis. Lisa, I'll hand it over to you now.
Great. Well, thanks so much for having me. So as you mentioned, and as you can see on the slide, I'm the founder and CEO of Kuli Kuli, and we're the leading brand pioneering moringa. So you might be thinking to yourself, what is moringa? I had no idea what it was about a decade ago. I started working with it in the Peace Corps in Niger, West Africa. I was a vegetarian, feeling like I wasn't getting enough nutrients in my diet, and a few friends in my village gave me moringa, and I've been hooked ever since, both on the incredible nutritional benefits of this plant and then also the way that we can create livelihoods, particularly for women in West Africa and other small farmers around the world through selling moringa here in the US. So Kuli Kuli now sells moringa bars, moringa powder, and moringa wellness shots in about 11,000 stores. And I have to say, a lot of those, early lessons from Peace Corps have stuck with me. So, Niger it's one of the hottest, driest countries in the world. And, I used to go running every morning, and it was, even in the morning, very hot. And people in my village would yell this phrase at me. They'd say, Kina Shawuya, which took me a couple weeks until I figured out what that meant. And eventually I learned that it directly translates into you are drinking pain. And that feels like that's kind of been a nice metaphor for my journey since then. I think, startups are amazing. Obviously, I wouldn't want to be doing anything else. But I think when you start a company, you are signing up for a lifetime of struggle and really need to be resilient and be able to pivot with change, like we've seen with COVID and now with Black Lives Matter movement. For us, it's been an interesting one. In the first month of quarantine life, we actually saw sales spike by 70% as more consumers turned to health and wellness products. And I think when you're confronted by this disease against which you have no tools other than your own immunity, you start to think a lot more about medicinal plants and different ways to use food as medicine. And we've actually seen a really nice sustained lift on our in-store sales since then. At the same time, we've also seen that our new business forecast for the rest of the year has essentially been cut pretty much to zero. We were supposed to launch into 800 new Walmart stores first week of April, kind of turned into an April Fool's that nobody laughed at when that got pushed till September and so on and so forth. So I give a lot of credit to my team. We were able to pivot and actually took our entire marketing budget, which had been, majority focused on brick and mortar retail, and put that all into digital. So we're redesigning our website, doing a lot more digital community building, thought leadership. It's been an incredible journey to just kind of pivot that whole side of our business pretty quickly. The other thing we've been doing is just having a lot of conversations within our team about all of the uncertainties in our life. And I think, started off for the past few months just talking about the uncertainty of COVID-19 and if we would ever come back to an office environment. And more recently, really talking about the Black Lives Matter protests. I don't know if you probably can't hear it through my mic, but I can actually hear news helicopters kind of flying around as we speak. I live, in the heart of downtown Oakland, and many of my team members live here as well. And so I think it's been really powerful for us to open up that dialogue both internally. We've had a lot of conversations around race, which I think can be a really hard topic for people to talk about. And also externally, we sent out an email to our entire list and really outlined how we want to support. We're a small company. We don't have huge resources, but we are donating 20% of our sales to Campaign Zero, which uses data-backed solutions to end police brutality. We've also been doing a lot of work, even before the past couple weeks of protests, to really diversify our team and make sure that we're building a diverse team, and have actually been one of the pilot companies in the natural food industry of spearheading what that looks like. Because I think a lot of us walk into these trade shows and it feels a little bit like a white country club. There's not a lot of diversity, and so we're really trying to address that head on and figure out what we can do to help make our own team as creative and diverse, as vibrant as possible, and also help just build that up at an industry level. So I think, a couple of my learnings of leadership and through all of these changes, I think the first one is really around transparency. I think we have very much opened the books and shown our team, here's our financials, here's our cash situation, here's our forecast, here's the cuts we need to make, and we need all of your help to do that. And they responded incredibly well and have really dove into making those changes. And similarly, I think transparency around race and how that is a hard conversation to have, but how it's also one that we can't ignore, and that a conversation that needs to be had. I think one of the second things I've learned is that as a leader, you need to make decisions, and you often need to make decisions quickly. But so often those decisions can be made even more thoughtfully if you kind of get buy-in from your team in advance. And so one of the things we've been doing is having a remote team stand-up, just a 15-minute full team meeting every morning, and have found it's been a great way for people to just spend a couple minutes presenting different aspects of our business and getting feedback in ways that we didn't actually have kind of a format for before. And then the last thing I would say is that I think we are living in a world where increasingly people don't trust government. And if you look at sort of the power of government, it's actually been decreasing for the past few years. Walmart has more economic power than many countries combined. And so I think as businesses, we have a real role to play in taking a stance and taking a stance on the issues we care about. And I think consumers are now looking more and more to businesses to both have that moral compass and also communicate on the issues they care about.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Lisa. I think that's really insightful, and you gave such concrete examples of the changes you're making. So we really appreciate that. And now I think it's time to turn it over to Nichole. I'm really excited to hear your perspective of working and managing a workforce of thousands here in North America, and as well as being part of a global company and kind of seeing what that looks like, especially through this pandemic and beyond.
Sure. Thanks, Jillian. I mean, after Marcus and Lisa, I'm not sure that there's a lot left to be said because they've hit on about everything. And Jillian, as a startup, is doing a lot of great things. So congrats on that. But, you know, as I think and as we talked about this particular forum and leading through change, you know, obviously that is something that is so key right now, but it's something that happens all the time. Right? We are constantly changing and evolving, whether that be from a society, from a business strategy, from what our workforce needs to look like or does look like. And so this concept of change is really interesting. I think what we've put on top of it at this point is crisis, right? And being able to lead through that in a different way. I think, you know, when you think about the particular situation with COVID, no one could have been prepared for that. It doesn't matter how great your crisis management plan was and how many hours you put into it. No one was truly ready to take on the challenge that was a both financial and health epidemic. So when I look at what have our key learnings been through this, I think there's really three that come to mind for me. And one is the key of communication, right? That is something we have to do all the time, but it was so critical during this and continues to be so critical for leaders to communicate regularly, communicate honestly when they know something and don't, and be as transparent as possible. And I think the cadence of those communications is really key in a time like this. You're leading through change. I think everyone has come to the conclusion that what we left is not what we will go back to, whether that be because your business has changed dramatically, your financial situation has changed, or just the way we work has changed. And so the communication through all of that, whether it be decision making, being honest to say, we just don't know yet, whatever it is, it has been really key. The other is that this concept, as Marcus mentioned, of both empathy and authenticity, right? This situation has completely leveled the playing field. I've heard that from employees who work remote 100% of the time and say, I've never felt like I'm on a more equal playing field than I am right now because everyone's in my situation. And when you can have a town hall and have the CEO's cat crawl all over him, right, this is when we know we're all literally in this. It doesn't matter what job you're in what location you're in, globally or in the US, your kids are at home and you're trying to manage that, right? You have elder care situations. You live by yourself and that, you know, brings a whole new challenge. And so having the empathy for everyone's personal situation and allowing the authenticity as leaders to come out has been key. But then that follows on to the last one, which is around flexibility, right? You can't survive this situation as a leader without being flexible with your staff. And that's because you're empathetic to the situation that they're in. And those are really have been the three key takeaways. I think what we know in times of crisis and in times of change is you're going to have leaders rise and you're going to have leaders fall, right? And being able to help those leaders that are struggling help their staff is key because you can't have a break in this, right? Especially in this particular situation where it's impacting everyone and everyone in a different way. And so those are the things to me that have been really big key takeaways. I think what we all have to look at as organizations is, okay, what has been the good that's come out of this that you want to keep? And what are the things that maybe you've done particular to the situation that you will let go a little bit? I think, you know, I think some of the good things that have come out of this, the flexibility, the authenticity, I can't say that word now, being authentic as a leader and opening yourself up. I'm just going to change the word and open yourself up are things that have been so positive. And I've seen teams connect in ways that they wouldn't have otherwise, right? And it's not in person, it's remote, it's in different ways. It's checking in on someone just because, where in the past you'd be running around the office and you never stop, you'd never think to just stop and do that. And this situation has given us the ability to do so. So there's a lot that has come that is positive that I think we should keep. And it's the cadence of communications. For instance, one of the things that we've done in our organization in North America is we have put out videos from executive leaders every single week since the crisis has started. The message has been different. It has been timely, but it has been, just like Marcus said, in our normal clothes, in our home, out on our back porch, with our animal barking in the background, whatever it is. And it has caused a lot of really positive discussion in the organization. And so those are things that we will keep. We will keep a cadence of communication that is far greater than what we had in the past. We will keep having an authentic dialogue from the leadership team out to the staff overall. And I think the things that we will continue to look at is how do we work in the future, right? What flexibility can we maintain long term? And yeah, maybe we back off some of that, right? But you know, we have people working remotely today, as I know many of you do, that never have worked remotely before, right? We're in a situation where our traders are trading from home, right? It never would have thought in a million years, but that was the situation, and that's what dictated it, and it's how we kept our employees safe. And so in the future, we're going to look at how do we do things differently. And for the first time, probably, we're going to look at preference of the employees, right? It's not a guarantee, right? It's not a demand. It's a point in time sort of assessment of where everyone's mind is. And I think given that this is such a unique situation, being able to understand that and make decisions as an executive team with the understanding of everyone's situation is going to be so key, right? We can make them in a vacuum. We may get 80, 90% of it right. We may not. We may fail miserably in our decisions. But when we can do that with more information and understanding of people's personal situation, when this may go on for some very long period of time, especially in certain locations, until we know we can get back to a situation, having that information is key. And I think it also gives employees the sense that they are cared for, and their personal situation matters in how we move forward as an organization. And so I think those are really key things of what we'll do. The last thing I'll mention is sort of pros and cons of what if you stay in this remote environment, right? What's it look like to be 100% remote? What's it look like to be 75% remote? And there are a lot of pros and cons, right? Yeah, you know, the biggest pros are you can attract your talent from anywhere, right? All of a sudden, your talent pool goes from this big to this big. And if you can get the onboarding process right and you can get the relationship building right, that is a huge key, right? Massive, massive improvement or growing of your talent pool. On the flip side, you know, and this is something that is key to Rabo, is culture, right? And how do you maintain a culture that is collaborative, that is caring, all the things that whatever it is that your organization stands for culturally, how do you maintain that when no one's together or such a small group of people are together? And I think that drives the need. I don't actually see that as a con. I don't know that there's a lot of cons, but there certainly are challenges that come with it that you have to be able to address. And if you can't address the domino effects of having a more remote working environment, then you're going to have things fall in the areas of culture, in the areas of talent, in the areas of productivity and engagement. And those are all things we know we need to be successful. So those are my points. That's what I think. I think this has been truly a unique, unprecedented, right? I think I've said probably 400 times in the last couple of months. It will continue to be. But I think we've been able to learn a lot from this. I think all organizations have, and we should put those things in our pocket, continue to learn from them, and take them forward in how we operate in the future.
Thank you, Nichole. I think that was really incredibly well said and candid, and really touches on a lot of things that the industry and society at large is talking about in businesses. So I appreciate that, and you all brought up really interesting points that I see patterns with in each of you, and I think we can dig into the Q&A and see what we're getting from there. So I'll hand it over to Annie to march us off.
Wow, you've all touched on a lot of similar issues, but from a different angle, and so that was really, really exciting to see how, whether big, small, new, emerging, you all are navigating this with authenticity. I heard a lot, transparency, bringing integrity back into the decision-making process, building a team decisive approach to things so that you get buy-in, and letting people see each other in the raw, so to speak. So I love that. I've read a lot that supports those type of leadership, new qualities that are being recognized. When I think about some of the other things that I see that are maybe on the more challenging or what I would say negative side is that we also as leaders during crises go to old behavior or old patterns to solve problems because that's where we find comfort, and sometimes that's where we find muscle and strength and being able to sometimes navigate some difficult decisions, which let's not pretend we are navigating some very difficult decisions. And so what would be great to hear from you guys is how do you take those difficult decisions, especially, we would argue innovation needs to stay front and center, but, that might not be front and center right now, and how people are going to navigate through that. So that was a long-winded, crafted question, and I'm going to pose it to all of you. How do you avoid the old behavior becoming your crutch, especially as you have to lead with new challenges, and maybe if you have examples of how you may have dealt with that in your own decision making as leaders? I'll start with you, Marcus.
Okay, thank you, Anne. Look, I think that's a really good question because we know as human beings it's easier to operate in your comfort zone, whatever that is. And particularly if you're a leader, and this is uncharted territory. So most leaders, if any of them, have ever been through something like this. So I think it comes back to that authenticity and the vulnerability, I think, that leaders have had to sort of embrace, even if it wasn't comfortable for them. And even if they've worn a actor's face or been pretending in a CEO role or a leadership role for a long time, I think the very fact that they're working from home, it's a leveler, everyone's in the same boat, it's impacted everyone, has meant that they have had to make, communication broadcasts from their living room with the cat crawling across the floor or the granddaughter being walked in or something going on in the street that's causing noise. So they've had to learn to be more flexible, and they've had to learn to be tolerant of more flexibility for their staff and their customers. And so I think that's driven a lot more perhaps forced authenticity or forced sort of flexibility, if you like. But I think a lot of the senior people I've spoken to have said, well, that's here to stay. They actually quite like it. They actually have let their guard down a little bit. And I think when you do that, you're more open as a human being to other people's ideas. They've actually been more open to say, well, I don't know how to deal with this. I've never confronted this situation. Does anyone else have any other ideas? And I think they've been more open to other people being involved, to contributing, no matter what role they play in the organisation, because we know good ideas and innovation comes from everywhere. I think that's spurned, I think, a real opportunity for employees, for teammates to really get in and contribute. And I think, let's face it, most of us are a lot more courageous when we're on the end of an email or a text message or a Zoom call than we are perhaps if we're face-to-face with the boss or a senior person. So I think there's been much less intimidation and I think much more courage and boldness by people to put forward ideas. So I think from both the leadership side and more flexibility and authenticity and more understanding and empathy, but from the follower side or the people side, I think people have been more willing to contribute because they've seen that authenticity, they've seen that flexibility. So I think both sides have really learned and given a lot. And I think to Nichole's point, if we can sustain some of that, I call it caring, but it's empathy between everyone as human beings. It's a more humanistic culture rather than an us and them. I think that would be an awesome takeaway from this terrible situation.
It's almost like we're coining a new word. Is it social business leadership? Is it social leadership within organizations? I mean, it is the welfare and the caring of our community. It really is the need to look, and as Nichole said, and I'll turn it over to Nichole and Lisa next, but that is a big part of what we're building into our models, especially as we have a more remote workforce wherever we are. So I like this idea, and I don't know, maybe we'll coin it here, but social leadership and how you do that successfully. I'd love to get Lisa and Nichole, your thoughts on that.
Sure. I'll jump in on that one. I think, as in my role, I do a lot of coaching of senior and executive leaders. And I would say that a lot of the things that we're talking about are things that many successful leaders have always done well, right? And I would say those were the people I would point to and say they're a good leader, right? They can be vulnerable with their team. They can, apologize after they have a poor behavior, like all of these things that I feel like people are just now regularly doing. And maybe it's because it's more visible to everybody that it's there. But I do think that it is a skill set that some haven't had to call on. So it does feel new to them, right? And I think, the thing that I think about in my role is as we build leadership competency, how do we build this into it, right? How do you select and develop your leaders to ensure that if we're in a situation like this, or even if we're not, that they have the skill set to take on this entire leadership model that is built on connectedness versus I'm here and you're here. And it does. And I think a lot of organizations would have to change. Your best bricklayer isn't your best manager of the bricklayers, right? That's let people do what they're good at. And this is a different skill set. And so, that's where my mind goes, but that's also because of the seat that I sit in, that we have to make sure that we're selecting our talent in leadership roles, promoting our talent into leadership ranks because they've been able to exhibit these type of behaviors with their peers and with their teams, so that when crisis happens or major change happens, they can lead through it in a way, in a calm and sustained way.
Yeah, Lisa, I know you spoke a little bit in your opening remarks really about how you've created leadership positions in partnership, and that was a big way. And we seem to think that that's just easier to do in a small setting, but when you really are pivoting your whole model, that's almost crucial because you need everyone working sort of in harmony. How do you see this, as your challenge in continuing to forge forward and be the kind of leader that is going to continue to welcome collaboration, honesty, and partnership?
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about the different trends that the pandemic has accelerated. I think a lot of people are talking about, the trend to e-commerce has been accelerated by 5 to 10 years. But I think the trend to a more humanizing style of leadership has also been accelerated. And I think when, you look at sort of previous generations, I know for like my parents, they're very much of like, work is work and personal life is personal life, and those things don't mix. And I think there's a lot of millennials for whom work and life are sort of more intertwined. And I think we're now getting to, a workforce where essentially our work has now dropped into our personal life, and everybody, sees our bedroom or our cat, our granddaughter. And I think it's really humanizing. And I think when you are put in that place, it's hard to not collaborate, right? It's hard to just say authoritatively, here's what we're going to do, get on board, because you sort of see people as humans, not just as kind of robots who are going to do your bidding. So I think it's been an exciting trend.
And one of the things that I think about with this is we have people doing all these things, right? With the interruptions, with the dependent care, with the cats and the this and the that. And it's working, right? And people are also dealing with crisis in their life in a way where they've never had to, right? When's the last time anyone in the United States has ever been told they can't leave their house, right? I mean, this is a really interesting thing, but it's working. And I don't know about other organizations, and Marcus, maybe you have some specific examples too, but we're actually seeing productivity rise. And so I think about that particular case, and then send all the kids back to school, know that the elderly parents are okay, find a kennel for the cat, whatever it is, right? And put people in this remote working situation without all of the extra. And imagine how well that could work. I mean, it just seems so much simpler I know that if I could just get my kids out of the house, man, it would be amazing. I love them dearly, by the way, but
people would be really, really productive if we didn't have to also homeschool, right?
Well, this is the reason why we say the people who work from home, who truly work from home, are more productive, right? And so there's so much that can come from this.
Do we think that becomes part of permanent planning for many companies? I think we're not alone in this realization. And then, what do we think as a bank, clearly my risk metrics are starting to go off, but, and for others, how do you, whether you're in a small body, how do you make sure that there isn't, nefarious things going on, and how do you protect your organizations when you think about that?
Yeah. Well, and it goes back to your comment on innovation. We have to innovate in many different ways, right? And if we can do that, not just from a product and an external facing, but from a talent acquisition, from a risk metrics, from everything and how we do that, then we can do it, and it'll take innovation across the board. Marcus, you had something to say?
Yeah, I think if I can comment, I think it's, I think the coronavirus or COVID, like a lot of crises, I suppose, has been, for me, it's really been a catalyst for the change that we've been talking about for 10 or 15 years, frankly. I think, we've been talking about the use of digital channels. We've been talking about working from home. We've been talking about flexibility in the workplace. But we know there are still so many bosses and leaders out there that don't believe in flexibility, even though they might say so. But they don't walk the talk. And I think this has been a real realization for them that flexibility in the sense of working from home, or people working remotely or working part-time, actually does increase productivity in many ways. It does build more engagement. And I think that's one of the things that we do have to look at, because obviously there are challenges for individuals working at home if they don't have any other housemates, if they don't have the cats and the dogs, or things around them to make life more palatable when they're alone. So there are mental health issues that we've seen introduced because of COVID and working from home. I think one of the things that organizations have started to do well is follow up on the health of their employees, of their staff. Make sure that leaders are trained or coached, if you like, to actually ring each of their people, like have a one-on-one on, not necessarily Zoom, because I think sometimes we all put on a Zoom face, there's a smile, but I think sometimes a phone call is a little bit more personal. So it's making sure you use the different forms of communication, but sometimes a phone call to say, how are you, when someone's living by themselves, or they're a single person, or they might have other issues going on in their lives, people open up a little bit more. It shows a caring for their mental health as well as their physical health, if you like. And it's that reaching out that is genuine. Whereas if you pass someone in the office, we know most people say, how are you? And they haven't even heard the response, and they're 5 yards down the corridor. So I think a how are you has really got a new genuineness to it. And if it's made by a leader who's following up one of their staff members who they know is in a situation where they're by themselves, I think, there's a responsive action that someone knows they're being cared for in a work environment. So I think corporates are doing quite a lot, and I noticed there was a question from Nina on the health, how are corporates following that up? And I think one is training their people to follow up their individuals, their employees, their staff, their team members, but also encouraging them to use the flexibility. Don't put pressure on people to attend 7, 8 o'clock meetings, so to speak. But, be flexible around team meetings. If one person can't make it, okay, that's understandable because they've got child or grandparent issues or dog or cat issues or builders in the house or something because there's a problem, and be actually open to that. And it's easy to catch up if you're talking to each other on Zoom every day for 8 hours, but not extend the hours, because people are working long hours because they're working from home. We're finding people are, because it's easy, you don't have all that travel time, you don't have all the changing time, you can use the facilities easily. So there's a lot more hours in a day, theoretically, and a lot of us are spending that working. So I think we just got to be careful to get the balance of mental, emotional, and physical health right. A lot of workplaces and corporate leaders I've seen have encouraged people to be actually going for walks when we could get out of the house and walk, but actually embrace the walking and almost have walking meetings, so to speak. So I think there's a lot of things people have learnt that add value in the workplace, if not just productivity, staff engagement, in a real measure of staff engagement, not just ticking a box to say, I'm going to stay at this employer. So I think there's a more real reality, if I can put it that way, a more caring reality that I'm hoping will be sustained. And well, it's up to us, isn't it? It's up to us as individuals, frankly, to sustain it.
If I may, I want to put a question to Lisa, because I think you've touched on a few things that my experience, especially with FoodBytes and all of the amazing startups that we've worked with, is that I don't know pre-crisis, post-crisis when they aren't working. So now that there are very few transitions in your life, how do you manage that? Then I also want to tag on another question before we pass that on. Because the other thing, especially for your business, health and wellness, as Marcus talked about, and even Nichole, is really, elevated in how we're caring for our employees. And most specifically for your product, health and wellness and what you offer is really a transformational, what we would call product, because people are looking for food as a way to care for themselves. But in the new economy, and you're building this digital platform and sort of innovating your own model, how do you see that as, we know it's going to be over the next year or so, people are going to be stretched, and so we fully expect the economy is going to be under a lot of pressure, and where people are going to be, we sort of see it as a barbell. We're seeing the sort of staples really being core to people. Business pantries are fuller than ever before, more home eating. We don't think that's really going to change. Then you're also seeing this need for real wellness, and how you are shifting your model right now. Would be curious to hear a little bit about that, especially as a leader, and sort of adding that into your new model. Would be great to hear a little bit. So that's two questions for you.
Yeah, two big questions. Thank you. So I think on the first one, one of the things that I sometimes tell people is, the wonderful thing about being your own boss is you can work whatever 80 hours a week you want. And I think that, hasn't really changed in the COVID era. I think one of the things that I've been doing, just because I need it for my mental sanity, is really actually doing like a harder 5 o'clock stop. And I've never really had a 5 o'clock stop before, but now I do a 5 o'clock stop where I get out of the house and go on a hike, go on a walk. Thankfully in the Bay Area, there's a lot of places you can go that are, you can be farther away from folks. And, even if I have to come back and do emails or whatever later in the evening, I think just like making sure that I really make the effort to get out and get some exercise has been personally very rewarding. And I think on the health and wellness angle, it is something we think a lot about. Like, moringa is not canned beans. It's not toilet paper. We're not on anyone's list of staples. And so, we've really been seeking a lot of like looking at the data and feedback from our buyers. Will people still buy this in an economy where 1 out of 4 Americans is unemployed? And that is just a really hard question to answer. I will say, from what we've seen so far, that the data looks good. I was actually just talking to our Walmart buyer the other day, and he was like, we were looking really critically at your items and other more premium priced items, and we've found velocities have stayed high and people have continued to buy it. So I think it does go back to that health and wellness premium that people are willing to pay at the moment. And I think it also harkens back to the 2008 recession, where we did see actually sales of natural and organic products go up, not down. So let's hope that is that the spike of kind of Kellogg and General Mills and Coke will maybe still be spiked with a lot of natural food startups.
Thank you, Lisa. That's great. And I'm going to wish for that. So I think people are going to be seeking more health benefits from what they're eating. So let's hope that works for Kuli Kuli. We'll be supporting it for sure. One of the questions, we probably have time for 2 more questions, believe it or not, because I think this next question is something it's come in from a couple different angles. So I'm going to try to blend the question. But many corporates, and you touched on it, Nichole, are building culture and have these principles of a strong workforce culture and really bringing diversity into that and inclusion. It's a big part of what we've invested in a very big way over the last 12 to 18 months at Rabobank, as we brought 2 very big businesses together, and we're not alone in doing that. But we also now seeing, especially with the current rift in the world right now that we opened up with around racial divide, how do we create the right diversity? We have real restrictions on how we can do that. How do we do that in a fair and equitable way? And diversity, isn't just color; it's many forms. But we have restrictions in hiring process. So I'd love to get from you guys how we think that this is going to be addressed, because clearly it is now one of those things that's going to be front and center in many people's agendas. This is the time that people are having to think about that and plan. So maybe, Nichole, you want to kick us off on that tough, but I know you can handle.
Sure.
Question.
Yeah. No, it's an excellent question. And, I sometimes say that diversity and inclusion is not rocket science and can be one of the simplest things in the world, but at the same time, it can be the absolute most complex and difficult thing to do in an organization. And that's because an organization alone can do what they can within their own culture and their own control. But the issues that we're trying to deal with go so far beyond just what we do at our organization, right? And so when you're talking about systemic oppression and injustice, and you go back, think about how we get our talent within our organizations, right? Most of them come from schools or come from jobs. And if you go back from college to earlier education and even earlier education, how do you make that in a way where we've got equality across the board? And so that brings the complexity, right? The simple thing is you hire the best person all of the time. Simple, right? It seems simple. And we do have restrictions on the way we can go about that. But I think what we have to do within our organization, and what we talk about amongst my team, is chicken or egg, right? Do you build a culture that is welcoming and ready for diversity and inclusion, diverse thought, diverse experiences, diverse way of working, and all of the other maybe more obvious forms of diversity? Or do you go out and get that talent? Which do you have to do, right? You can attract it, but then lose it because your culture is not ready for it. Or you get yourself ready, and then you push in the way of acquisition and start to make some real change in your organization around some of the more, I would say, more obvious ways that we need to get diversity into our organization. And so, it's such a hard question because I don't know how you do that, right? I'm in charge of it, and I will tell you, there's no formula to make this work. You have to understand what your own organization is doing, what your limits are, right? Where your gaps are, and what your culture is, right? And you really have to do a deep assessment of your culture to understand, do we have a culture that is even ready or welcoming of D&I? And if not, then that's a whole different ballgame of being able to look at, and then you can worry about attracting a more diverse workforce. So it's no small nut to crack. It should be, right? It should be a non-issue, but we know that it's not, and we all have a long way to go. And I think even once we think we get to wherever we think we need to get going, we won't be there. Right. There'll be more to do.
Lisa or Marcus, do you have anything to add before we go to our last question? We have maybe another minute on this, and then you all know the final question, so you should be ready.
Yeah, I think, from my perspective, it starts, like so much of this, from the top. And I think when you can fill at least one senior position on your team with a person of color and a person from a underrepresented minority group, I think that goes a long way in helping to then start to trickle down the changes in culture and recruitment and what you need to do from there. So we did a big initiative over the past months or so to really diversify our team, and we found that really focusing on some of the leadership positions we had first, also focusing on more broadly where we were recruiting from, the metrics that we were evaluating people against. I think there's a lot of subconscious bias in all things, right? Like we read Harvard and we're like, this person must be smart. Is that true? No. Maybe, but I think just making sure that we recognize our own biases and try to remove those as much as possible, removing resumes, removing schools. I think there's a lot of great tools, which Nichole probably can detail even more than I can, that just helped us reshape the way we were thinking about who we were hiring, and then kind of retooling our culture to make sure that it was a welcoming environment. But I really do think it goes hand in hand. I think you can't do one without the other. I think they have to be done in tandem.
We have very little time. Yeah,
oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry, Nichole, because I really think this is important. I think everyone's going to want to hear this. You have really one sentence, and I'm going to go to each one of you. What is the one thing, that over the last few months that you've really adopted as a leader that you plan on really retaining, that this is going to become your authentic tool, the authentic you as a leader then, and what is that one thing? And as brief as you can, because we have a minute and a half before we're out. So who wants to start? Did I pick you, Marcus?
Sure. Happy to. I think, look, for me, there's so much in there. It's difficult to pick one, of course, but I think the one that really resonates is don't forget to connect with people. We're so connected to our devices. We're so connected to the digital world. We're running at 1,000 miles an hour. I think, if nothing else, these crises and particular pandemics through history have taught us to slow down a little bit as human beings, as a race. And I think it's really don't forget to connect with people as people, whether they're the people you love around you or people you care for at work, and learn to appreciate each other as a human being, not a resource.
Thank you, Marcus. That's great. So connecting with people, I love it. Lisa?
I think it's admitting that you don't have all of the answers, and that in certainly a situation like a global pandemic, no one really does, but that you are looking for feedback, looking for collaboration, and looking to find the best possible solution.
Love that. So vulnerability and partnership. Great. Thank you. Nichole?
So I'm going to tag on to Marcus a little bit because he stole my answer, because I would say connecting with people. I would say connecting with people as well, but I would add to that, as you do that authentically in your leadership role, also allowing people the room and letting them know it's okay to not be okay, right, during a time like this. And I think if you can just let your people, it's okay. We're all going to hit a wall. We're all going to have our rough days. We're all going to not know what to do in this particular situation, and know that we're just up to here, and it's okay not to be okay. And I would say that for COVID, and I would say that for everything else that's going on in the world right now with injustice, it's okay to not be okay. And if you can allow your employees to do that, it'll go a long way.
So permissioning, it sounds like.
Yeah,
that's great. I can't thank you all enough. Jillian, take it away.
Yeah. Thank you, guys. I know we're just about a minute over, but that was really fantastic discussion. Thank you for everyone who tuned in, and a huge thank you to our speakers, Marcus Kennedy, Lisa Curtis, and Nichole Riley. You can find a recording of the webinar on our website in the coming days, and keep an eye out for our next webinar, which will be June 17th. Thanks again. Have a good one, guys.
Thank you all.
Hey, everyone.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Bye, everyone.
Yeah. Bye.